This is Duke University.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope some of you got a chance to look at the 6 wonders of the 7th, but I found 6 of them. And just to give you a little bit of background, the reason that I came up with those tools and those devices is because we were invited to do a competition. It's going to be a 1-day competition in Raleigh for the Hunt Library, and it was at Centennial Campus. And I wanted to really walk into the competition with some ideas before we even started the competition. And I wanted to walk in with a set of ideas that were provocative. Something that would allow us to think differently about the architecture we're about to make. And so I really thought long and hard about it, and I came up with qualitative aspects of our architecture as opposed to things. I wanted to have ideas that we could walk in with and to see where it would take us. These are 7 that I came up with, and I'd like to give a little bit of credit to what inspired me for this. And it was Marcel Duchamp. And Marcel Duchamp realized during the war that there's a high probability that all of his artwork that he had produced would be destroyed, and that there would be no vestige of it left. So he came up with this wonderful idea, which was to miniaturize all of his work and put them into this box, and to carry the box with him, and to even reproduce more boxes like this. And he, in essence, created his own history. He created his own way of people remembering him, and to make sure that he would be remembered and his ideas would be remembered. What I found compelling about this is that he had to be selective. He had to choose. And from what I understand, each time he created another box, there were more and more of these ideas that he put into the box. But in essence, he had to create the essence of his work that could be replicated and put into a box, which I think is a kind of interesting idea. When we started the competition, there were a number of ideas that I thought about, and the premise of the competition was to create an architecture that would allow for collaboration, allow for networking, would allow the best and brightest minds who came to that building at the library to come together and think of things they'd never thought of before. So I thought about ideas that would allow that to happen in this building. Connectivity was one of them. I was really interested in how you create an architecture that allows people to be in different realms, to be in disconnected realms, but also to be connected in some way. What are the things that allow those things to happen? What I've done is I've selected a number of our projects for each one of these qualities to help you understand a little bit about what may have been implicit in the design of that building that may not be completely apparent until you experience it. You're going to hear me say the word experience a lot. This is about the experiential aspect more so than the intellectual aspect or conceptual aspect of the buildings. One of our buildings, it's actually a collection of buildings in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's Blue Cross Blue Shield. It's a campus. And it's a campus in which the leadership told us, we really want to change how we think, change how we work. We want to be an environment where every individual is respected, but we come together as a community. So even the basic premise of how the buildings are put together as individualized buildings that all face out toward the city, the expansive views with gardens in between them, each of those buildings comes together to create this nucleus of a community. The buildings are connected on the ground plane from end to end. It's almost like a necklace with a series of charms on it. and looped together in the center point, but also connected on the upper levels. Very important for the people working here to have that sense of connectivity with each other. So we created not only the physical aspect of how that might work. This is that central quad where they come together and they actually have meetings out here. But that from every vantage point in this environment, you're able to really see the other people who are working here. The visual connectivity is as important. The idea to actually be able to connect and see the community of people you're working with was very important. That even from the bridge level where you're connecting at the upper levels of this building, there's constantly a view of who that rest of that group is that you're working with. And to see that community and to be surrounded by that community. Are they connected? Are they not connected? And are they physically connected? Are they technologically connected? These are all some of the nuances of this environment that these people work in. It's interesting, when we started the project, they said, we want to change from a service-related company to a knowledge-based company. We want people to share ideas about healthcare. So we thought about the environment that would create that. The second wonder, and wonder is a double entendre, of course. These are things I wonder about. Flexibility. And you hear the word flexibility over and over in every kind of building we do today. Partly because of the unpredictable future, partly because technology is allowing us to do things that we never thought we could do before. But I'm always wondering if that capacity for change, if it's mental or if it's physical. That we have a capacity to change and alter the space we're in simply by our relationship to it by scale. And you can't see it quite well here, but if you look outside and actually if you play with the toys that I brought today, you'll see that the image at this scale is clearly recognizable. The mid-image, as it expands to the much larger scale, seen through these layers, is one that I don't quite recognize. So distance, my capacity to change inside that space, my capacity to expand the space, changes my perception of the space. It's a project that we did for 1 million square feet in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's a technology center. And we realized that right from the beginning that to make this an effective place for the technology people who would work here, we need to create the third place, as you've all heard of, as a place to do work that's outside of your cubicle. And we created not only a second environment for that, but we created an environment that would allow you to expand and contract. That I could have a group of people in this zone, which is the oval, but I could essentially expand my visual and psychological sense of that space all the way across the street and think of that expansion in the way that space flexes and has the ability to expand in and out. Similarly, we created a bridge that connects these two buildings and the space underneath. This became another one of those flexible spaces that can be the size for 3 people or for 3,000 people. Again, my perception of that space, my perception of scale is a flexible one, depending on the number of people and where I am in that space. The third wonder is layering. And this is one that I'm really intrigued with because I often think about cities that I visited in which I'm never really able to see the totality of that city. I only have snapshots. And if someone asked me to describe a city, I would just describe it with my accumulated set of fragments that I'm able to put together in my mind. Or it may be how you describe So when someone says, how do I get there? You describe it by a sequence of landmarks. It's one of our projects here at Duke. This is the Center for Integrative Medicine. And when we started this project, the doctors told us we want to revolutionize the meaning of healthcare, what that means. And she described it as a journey. It's a journey of healing, a journey of discovery. And so we literally created a building that was constructed as a series of paths, a journey that leads you from the moment you enter the building here into this space, through this path, along this path, down this path, and finally ending up here. And along the way, there are a series of discoveries. You're never able to really understand the whole. You only understand the path. And the path is one that begins here on the outside, brings you through this arcade. As you come through this space, you enter this space, which is the library. You turn and you find yourself looking out into the garden, past this desk, down this passageway, always in touch with nature. Nature has an incredible healing capacity. Around the corner into the garden space, and finally in the nutrition center. You never really see it all together. But as patients who have been here have told me, so there's an amazing thing that happens because along this path I'm seeing things that are teaching me, are putting me in touch with my senses, visually, physically. I'm touching things, I'm feeling things. The building is posing questions for me and I'm learning from it. This is I call it our wabi-sabi. Wabi-sabi is this element here, which is to celebrate an accident, to celebrate something that's unexpected, that poses a question. The next wonder is ambiguity. And this is a fun toy to play with outside because if you spin it, you realize that the giraffe at some point, when it's pixelated to a certain point, that same pixelation on the opposite side of the box turns into a bird. And the transformational ability of our senses to be able to associate and to clarify what something is, understand what it is, I think is a huge part of our learning process. Whereas one of my teachers once said, learning is the process of making the strange familiar. We played with that idea in this building. This is the School of the Arts in Winston-Salem. I don't know how many of you know about the school, but they have painting, sculpture, film, art, music, theater. All of the arts are taught here. And we wanted a building that in some respect would capture those qualities. Qualities of things that we use to understand those arts. And our strategy was to really think of this both theatrically and sculpturally, and to think about, once again, the perception of arriving on campus, seeing the object, we call it the encounter space, seeing the object, driving past the object, past the theater, around, all the way around, and then finally arriving in the object. At which point the object is no longer an object, it's no longer sculpture, but it's a space. So our brain has just flipped from something becoming an object to something becoming spatial. It's a simple thing. It's something we encounter every day in all of our lives and the way we think about things. But we created this notion something that we consciously use as a tool in what we do with our architecture. Next one is transparency, and this one fascinates me because we're living in a voyeuristic world right now. We're watching each other. Now, Apple's even allowed me to tap it and look at myself. I can watch all of you at the same time. I can watch you while I'm sleeping. I'm interested in how transparency, in some ways, allows us, because of the way we use it, to influence. And for this, we really used a project we did here called McKinney. McKinney is an ad agency. And their chairman came to me and said, my people are not talking. My people in different accounts doing different Audi people on the Audi account are not talking to the NASDAQ people. And these other people for the Nike account are not talking to these other people. What can you do? I said, well, let's change the paradigm of your workspace. This is the traditional paradigm in which workers work around the perimeter in their cubicles, in their cells. These are the meeting rooms, conference rooms. I said, of course they're not talking, because that person has to walk all the way down the hall to meet this person. What if he saw him all the time? What if he bumped into him? What if we change the dynamics of this to something that's more like this, that's urban? In a way, the notion of creating spaces around the perimeter where people can actually bump into each other, an individual can talk to another individual. In our first meeting, he said something really profound. He said, do you realize how fragile an idea is? You might have this brilliant idea, and all of a sudden you get a phone call, or someone bumps into you and says, can I interrupt you for a second? Or someone says, oh, that's a silly idea. How can you foster small ideas into becoming big ideas in this environment? We created places around the perimeter where you and I can talk, and I can share my little idea without feeling intimidated. The next group of people is a group of 6 people who can talk about your idea and how it's going to evolve. Then it moves into this space where it's 12 people, and now your idea is building legs, and people are inputting into your idea. And when you're ready to present the whole idea, you bring it to the forum in the middle of the town square, and 300 people get to watch your idea. This is we call it the branding tower. The branding tower these are the groups of 12 who can meet in these rooms. And guess what? I can be talking on my phone and I can see what someone's doing in that space. And I may even subliminally be influenced by it. I may even go, hey, that's an interesting idea. I'm going to ask them about it, or I'm going to be influenced by that idea. I'm not quite ready to share my idea with everyone, but I'm going to share it with somebody here over a coffee. Believe me, they've got 3 coffee centers pumping out caffeine all day long. I think someone was saying earlier, we were talking about this, are we playing or are we working? And we create a play area that is also a work area. Because sometimes great ideas come when we're playing with each other. Again, the same environment. It's a work environment, play environment. I'm ready to present to my client. And the day before, I present to everyone in my office. So 300 people will collect here. A 30-foot screen will come down. And my little idea that's been percolating for 6 months is now going to be presented to everyone as ready to be launched. These people are not interested. Duality. Again, something that fascinates me about our today's world. When does a social setting become negated by iPads, Facebook, and MySpace? We were talking about this before this conference, about young people dating with their laptops in hand, going to dinner and flipping up the laptops, and we're trying to figure out if they're substituting conversation with just being able to text to each other. I still think there's a place for face-to-face contact, for human contact. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in the room right now. We were asked in this particular environment, these are both two towers with IT people. They're classified as IT people. You know, these are people who really want to be where they are. These are IT people. And I said, well, IT people may want to leave their desks sometimes. And we're going to give them this wonderful garden space, but we're also going to give them the garden pavilion. And this is going to be a place where they can come together. They can say, I'm leaving this. I'm going to go to this. And I'm going to hopefully do this. Or this. Are they working? Are they playing? Are they lounging? Are they socializing? I wonder that sometimes in my office when I see everyone on their computer. Are they surfing or are they working? And I tell them every week, if you're surfing, surf for something intelligent that you can bring to us. This is another incredibly overused word today, sustainability. And you know, sustainability, this is the one I didn't bring today. This one is a pun. Because you can see this tree is sustainable. It's been sustainable for millions of years. We've used it for shade, we've used it for nourishment, we've used it for our lives. And at the same time, I have a photovoltaic cell up here collecting sunlight to power the tree. It's implausible. Idea of this is that so many of the things that we identify as sustainability are really about our human condition and our experience in our architecture. And it's less about that piece of machinery on top of the roof, and really much more about that how we sustain our own ideas of what a healthy environment is. This is a new school for doctors, new school of medicine at Duke that we designed. And what I'm really inspired by is that the whole paradigm of how doctors are going to be taught is changing. This is going to be a team-based learning center. Each student actually is grouped with 4 other students in teams of 5. All questions are debated before an answer is given, and the group of 5 students will actually give one answer. If you get it wrong, all 5 of you get it wrong. Think about that for a second. If you haven't studied, you can't advocate a position. If you haven't debated the point, you're abdicating your vote. And all of a sudden, people are collaborating to become smarter. So we had to design an environment for that, but I said, if we're going to do that, why don't we also think about how that environment is going to be part of this environment? How the students who are going to be in here 16 to 18 hours a day, how those students are thinking about not just medicine, but about their well-being and about people's well-being. So we took the spaces that students would be meeting in, collaborating in groups in, outside of that lecture hall, and we grouped them into 3 spaces. And these are their social world. This is the space they spend between classes, spaces where the groups of 5 spend time with each other. All those 3 major spaces overlook the gardens. Can't get away from the gardens. Can't get away from the water gardens that are collecting. And when a rain event happens, you see something change. You see water fill up. You see the water coming down through each of these terraces. But you also become aware that this is a southern exposure, that each of these spaces is filled with light. "19 years ago, my wife had leukemia, and I called 20 different hospitals around the country to find out who had the best practices, who had the best success rate. They told me a place in San Diego had absolutely the best. I called them and I said, what sets you apart? What makes you different? And they said, well, our patients, when they're recovering, every patient has a garden. Every patient sees new life growing. I remembered that. So you see lots of gardens at my buildings. I'm going to move on to the next topic. And I realized after the 7 wonders that these are things that we subliminally apply to almost all of our work. But this is another kind of project. We were invited to do a competition in China. And as with all their competitions, they tell you have 3 weeks. I said, great, what is it? I said, we would like you to design a city for 6 million people in 3 weeks. I had a professor in school who asked us to design a boys' school in a day. We said, that's impossible. And he said, well, you can design a universe in 15 minutes, but it will be a 15-minute universe. So I remembered that lesson, and I said, well, okay, what can we do in 3 weeks? And one of the things I wanted to do is actually make commentary on how cities develop, how modern cities are created, and how to change that paradigm so that we don't go through the endless cycle of zoning and rezoning to try and create a mixed-use environment, which is essentially what has happened. The site is actually an amazing site. These are all shrimp farms. So there's nothing here. There's no context here. Just shrimp farms. And this is the site area that they want to create into a city. No small task. I became very interested in how cities evolved over time and to see how medieval cities took on their own pattern, how many of them were shaped organically by natural site conditions until some king or some ruler or somebody said, this is chaos, we need order here, and came and created an orderly system. I don't know if there was someone else before the Cartesian grid evolved, but it's fascinating to see how cities evolve, how they evolve from a point and radiate out, or how they evolve from a group of hills to one of the most amazing empires created. Talk about a network. To another fascinating evolution, Manhattan, which if you're in lower Manhattan, you see this medieval layout of all kinds of strange passageways and strange geometries until the leadership of the city said, we need order, we need a grid. Actually, it was a real estate developer who did that. Of course. And I began looking at Chinese culture and looking at the way in which they think differently than we do. Now, in our Western world, we like to think we're omnipotent, and as designers and as planners, we think we can create a center and everything else evolves around us and everything ties into that strong center. We can pretty much create a centroidal way of thinking, as most city planning in the modern times have happened. The Chinese, interestingly enough, don't believe in that. They believe that spaces, buildings, cities are, fractal is the word I use, they're episodic. There is no overriding concept that ties all this together. And I thought that was kind of fascinating because although this has one center, each of these have multiple centers. And even the way in which you experience, if you go to a piazza today, you come and discover the piazza, and then we reference ourselves around those centers. Each one of these, that may be the king's domain, but each one of these has their own center, multiple centers. Which kind of gave me an idea, which was to think about how to merge the sense of an organic world into a rigid, orderly world, and how that might, in fact, create a hybrid city. This was on day 2. So I created our own little storyboard that said, if I think about how waterfront cities, modern ones, are developed, you can even apply this to highways. It doesn't necessarily have to be a waterfront. This could be US 1. And a series of office buildings might emerge. And next to them, retail comes. Next to them, residential emerges. And so the pattern continues. And this developer says, well, I'm going to create my own center. I don't want to be over here. I'm going to create my own center. Atlanta. How many of you know Atlanta? Peachtree. This is the story of Peachtree. And pretty soon you get this zoning diagram that looks like this, and we complain. Why is it that people live here, but they work here, and you have to drive on this highway to get there? Well, that's the way the cities have been planned, by either economic forces or political forces. So we said, is there a way that we can change that dynamic if I took that long line of development, and someone in my office called it a wrinkle in time. We're compressing a couple hundred years worth of time into 3 weeks. And I continue to compress this and create a model that allows me to say, perhaps these epicenters that I'm creating are centers that can be both fronting water, can be inboard, may even bring some of these communities closer together. But begin to set up a couple models for us of density and how density might be created by compressing this long line into a compressed city. And this is the diagram that I thought was in the absence of time. I said, what if this was a city of cities? And if we remember cities, and we remember what makes Boston different from San Francisco, from New York, and Chicago, ultimately it's these green spaces that are the identifiers. Anyone who's been to San Francisco will recognize Golden Gate Park. But this is the thing that we remember. What if it was a city of cities? And so I even said, there's the experiential axis, and then there's a visual axis of how we experience these cities. And I even labeled the cities that combine to create the city. The Chinese understood this immediately. They said, oh, we've always wanted to have a San Francisco here in China. So we gave them examples of what those city patterns look like. And what it is about them that is unique, one from the other. Of public space, of neighborhoods. Chicago, the waterfront. San Francisco, okay, so we combined a little bit of Washington, D.C. and San Francisco together. The idea being that even though each of these represents a precinct, the way you experience them is along the opposite axis. That I'm allowed in a very short amount of time to experience 4 cities at the same time in one trip. Of course, you have to have landmarks. You have to have points of interest. So you can see that in the basic setup of densities, green spaces that connect in the north-south direction, the vehicular connections in the east-west direction, how to compress this line and hopefully in the process create a hybrid of where these things overlap. And things are no longer segmented and divided or overlapped environment. So a model for how to move forward in the city and create the city, but I think it allows for a lot of invention in between. Okay. Thank you. I know it's a lot to.
It's actually really quick. I was wondering that when you showed the building, where there was the seating of 300 people and then the 30-foot screen, was there a place for a human to speak, or was it always, would the presentation always be from the screen?
Actually, there are 3 screening places. There are 3 places where they can meet. If you walk into the space, and the idea was really, again, the idea was to generate as an idea of a small town, small city. And the idea of the branding tower was to create the landmark. That's the piazza, that's the campanile, that's where you come for information, but also to do work. How the people who work there experience it is completely different from the way a client who comes there experiences it. Because a client comes in from the street, the employees come in from the courtyard, they come in at a high level, they come in at the lower level, and even the branding tower itself is like theater. It's a theatrical front. The back side of it has all the stairs and elevators that connect everything vertically. So we talk to them all the time about how the business that they're in of capturing the essence of what someone is about, translating that for them. There's a lot of theatrics that goes with that. And how to create this big facade that becomes both theatrical, but you can also peek behind the curtain and see what's happening. And they just love that metaphor, because that's the business they're in. When we walked in for the interview, I had prepared 3 little models that when I walked in, the chairman of their company and 15 of their creative people walk in and he goes, have you got a building for me? We had a week to work on it. At least the Chinese gave us 3 weeks. We had a week I said, no. He said, what do you mean no? I said, we don't have a building, but we've got some really good ideas. He said, really? I said, like what? So I had built this model, and essentially it was a model that allowed him to see how two floors could become one. It's based on a Mobius strip, so I had an elevator core and a Mobius strip that connected these two sides. And I gave it to him and I said, can you tell me which floor you're on? And he spun it around and he said, no, I can't. How did you do that? So he passed it around the room and he came back and he said, what does this have to do with what you're going to do for us? I said, you'll see. So we got the job. But the whole idea of, and it comes back to the idea of the seven wonders, is that if I can tap into something that is so fundamental to our experiences and our perceptions of this thing we call architecture, then at least we have a common language. And I'm not talking about, well, architecture, we call it, you know, architects talk to each other in architectural terms. And the first time I turned to my client and said, have you thought about the interstitial space here? And he looked at me and he said, what the hell are you talking about? So it's essential for me in our work, always bring it back to the experience. And if I can tap into that, then I've succeeded. Thank you.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.